My name is Pete Stahl, and I am appearing here today on behalf of the League of Women Voters of the Los Altos Mountain View area. I'd like to welcome you all to today's pros and cons, and it's really pros and cons plus, as you'll see in a moment. We are going to be going over the ballot propositions and also a fair amount about the mechanics of voting, because this year voting is a little bit different. So away we go. I'm appearing on behalf of the League of Women Voters Education Fund, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. Now, this is separate from League's advocacy branch. League of Women Voters Education Fund is nonpartisan and educational. We have a mission to build citizen participation, and we study key community issues at all government levels in an unbiased manner in order to help inform you, the electorate. As I said earlier, it's separate from the advocacy arm. The advocacy arm does take positions on these ballot measures. I will not be talking about the advocacy arm's positions today. I'm simply going to be laying out the issues and letting you decide. The agenda for today, we'll be talking about voters' choice, which is new this year. I will give you some helpful online resources if you want to dig deeper into any of the issues. I will talk briefly about which candidates are running for office in our area. This area covers Mountain View, Los Altos, and Los Altos Hills. And then finally, we'll get to the heart of the presentation, the statewide and local propositions. Ground rules for today. I will give a description of each measure, and then I will give you arguments for and against, pro and con, hence the title of today's shindig. I will do my best to hide my own opinion. You should know that I actually hold strong opinions on many of these ballot propositions. If I do my job right today, you won't know what those positions are. So we will see how I do as the propositions go. The basic idea here is for me to lay out the issues, give you some reasons you might vote yes or reasons you might vote no. You get to decide what makes sense to you. Let me talk a little bit about voters' choice because it will have an impact on how you vote, the mechanics of voting. It's new this year in Santa Clara County, so those of you who voted in March in the primary already have some experience with it. There are no longer any neighborhood polling places. It might be that in the past you voted at a local school or church or fire station. Those are no longer there. Instead, you can vote in person at any vote center in the county. Now, you have to make sure that it's in the county. If you live, say, in Palo Alto, you cannot vote across the county line in Menlo Park. You have to vote any place in Santa Clara County. You can also vote by mail. After you receive your ballot, you fill it out, make sure you sign the envelope, and then you can pop it into any mailbox. You do not have to apply any postage. That is paid for by the county. You can also put it into an official ballot drop box, and I'll discuss where a few of those are, or you can go to these vote centers that I talked about earlier. Drop boxes are located in front of libraries in Mountain View at both of the main Los Altos branches in Sunnyvale, Palo Alto, and throughout the county. They're also located in front of City Hall and Town Hall in all three of our cities, Mountain View, Los Altos, and Los Altos Hills. They're located in front of Fire Station number 4 at the Computer History Museum, and there's one conveniently located in a parking lot of Foothill College, parking lot 8 at the student drop-off. And this is what these ballot drop-off boxes look like. They are white, they are big, they are metal, and they are very secure. Vote centers are places where you can drop off your ballot, and they are staffed. They take the place of your local neighborhood polling place. They also provide language assistance, and I don't have information on exactly which languages are supported at which vote centers, but I'll show you where you can get that information. Vote centers also have accessible voting equipment for people with disabilities who might need extra help in voting. You will be able to do same-day register and vote if you go to a vote center. You can do this all the way through Election Day, Tuesday, November 3rd. Vote centers are open starting on Halloween Day, October 31st. Some of them may be open earlier, but I don't have that information yet. Today is October 4th, and the list of vote centers is still a little bit subject to change, and the first days that they are open is a little bit subject to change. But at the very least, you will be able to vote starting on Halloween, October 31st, from 9 to 5 every day before Election Day. You can also go to the vote center on Election Day, and the hours on Election Day are 7 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the evening. Vote centers in our area are at the Mountain View Community Center on Rengsdorf, the Los Altos Youth Center on San Antonio, Town Hall in Los Altos Hills on Fremont, and these other places, Mobile Home Park, various churches in all three cities. There are more listed at sccvote.org, and I'll have a little bit more about sccvote.org. That is the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters site, and it has all of this information there just in case you need to look it up. It will also be listing any earlier start dates. Those of you who need accessible voting, there is a program within the new voting protocol called Remote Accessible Vote by Mail. It's at-home voting for voters with disabilities. In essence, you can use your own accessible tools at home to fill out your ballot. And once you've done that, you can then send in a printout of the results of your vote. This can also be used by overseas and military voters. You mark an electronic ballot using your own assistive technology at home, and your vote stays on your computer. As you can see, the last bullet point here, that ballot selections are not transmitted electronically through the internet. When you use remote accessible vote by mail, it's simply a way of creating a ballot with your choices on it on your computer. You then have to print that out and return it by mail. All votes have to be sent in by mail or in one of those white drop boxes or handed in paper to the people at one of the voting centers. sccvote.org. Please be sure that it's .org. If you go to sccvote.com, that address belongs to one of the political parties, and you'll end up seeing information that that party wants you to see. If you go to sccvote.org, you will go to the County Registrar of Voters, and this will have all of the information about the mechanics of voting. For most of us, we'll receive the ballot in the mail, fill it out at home, put it in the envelope, sign and date the envelope, and either pop it into one of the white drop boxes or put it in the US mail. And a couple of screenshots from the Registrar of Voters. One of the cool services provided at the Registrar of Voters is the ability to track your ballot. You fill out this form with your birth date and which election and your address. And a few days after the election, it will tell you whether your ballot has been counted. There are other online resources that you can be using to help you decide how to vote. The first of these is easyvoterguide.org. It's available in all of the languages you see here. There are plenty of ways to help cut down the complexity of the ballot measures. Here's an example, a simple half-page summary and pros and cons of, for example, Proposition 23. If you want to go into more depth, you can use votersedge.org. Votersedge.org asks you where you live and then finds your ballot. And you can see here, the top of the ballot has various elective offices. Further down are the ballot propositions. For each of the races, there are capsule summaries of the top priorities of the candidates, and then much more detail. One of the fun things that I like about Voters Edge is it enables you to follow the money. In this race here, you can see the candidate on the left has raised $1 million. The candidate on the right has raised only $5,500. And you can see who the largest contributors are. And this might help you understand what the candidate feels is important and who in the community are supporting them. And finally, there is the website of our own local league, the League of Women Voters of Los Altos Mountain View. That's LWVLAMV.org. We have pointers to all of the resources that I've just told you about. And we will also have pointers to the various local forums. Here's a local forum from a couple of years ago. You can tell because people are maskless and sitting next to each other. But we do have Zoom editions of candidates forums for almost all of the local contests that I will tell you about in a moment. So to the ballot. At the top of your ballot, of course, will be the presidential election. There are not just Democratic and Republican tickets, there are also 4 other parties that are running slates for president and vice president. When you vote for this, you can vote for any of these 6 parties, or you can write in your choice. This is the only contest on the ballot where you can do a write-in. And that's because for the legislative elections in California, we now have top 2 voting. When we voted in the primary way back in March, which seems like quite a while ago, we did the first part of top 2 voting, which is picking the 2 finalists. The 2 top vote getters in that March primary election are now on the ballot here in November. And because of that, there is no opportunity to add a write-in vote. You really have to choose one or the other. And as you'll see, in some cases, this means 2 members of the same party, or it might mean in certain other districts, 1 member of a party and another member who has no party affiliation. These are the choices that we made back in March. And I forgot the slide that explains exactly that, so here it is. So for the House of Representatives, our area is District 18, which covers Mountain View, Los Altos Hills, and all of the cities you see here and more that's off the map. In the primary in March, the top 2 finishers were both Democrats, and those are the only 2 choices you have. If you are not a member of the Democratic Party, it's up to you to decide what to do here. You might research these 2 candidates and choose the one that aligns most closely with your views. You also have the option of leaving this blank. You do not have, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you feel about top 2, you do not have the option of writing in. In the state Senate district, which begins in Sunnyvale and heads north all the way past San Mateo, these are the 2 candidates, Josh Becker and Alexander Glue. Our state assembly district is half the size of the Senate district. And we've got Mark Berman and Peter Otaki. Once again, no write-ins allowed. There is 1 judge on the ballot, and you vote to confirm or not to confirm this judge. Santa Clara County Board of Education. Here we have local contests where there may be multiple seats involved. In this case, there's a single seat and 2 candidates. In the Foothill-De Anza Community College District, there are 3 seats open this election and 4 candidates. You can vote for 1, 2, or 3 of them. The Mountain View Los Altos High School District has 2 seats open and 3 candidates. Those of you in the Los Altos School District, there are 2 seats and 2 candidates, and therefore there's no election. Neither of these candidates will appear on the ballot. They automatically win and will be sworn in shortly after the election. In the Mountain View-Whisman School District, on the other hand, there are 3 open seats and 5 candidates. For Los Altos City Council, 7 candidates for 3 seats. Los Altos Hills City Council, 5 candidates for 3 seats. Mountain View City Council, 9 candidates for 4 seats. El Camino Healthcare District, 5 candidates for 3 seats. And that's the end of the candidates. So you can see already it's a fairly lengthy ballot, and we haven't even gotten to the propositions. So I encourage all of you to start looking at these things as soon as you can, or as soon as you receive your sample ballot and your actual ballot as well. Those should be in the mail very shortly. On the ballot this year regarding propositions, there are 12 state propositions. They are numbered 14 through 25. And I will be going through these in a fair amount of detail. There are also 3 local measures that affect our area of Mountain View, Los Altos, and Los Altos Hill. City of Mountain View has a measure named C. The Santa Clara Valley Water District has a measure named S. And then there's a very creatively named measure RR for the railroad. And that's a Caltrain sales tax, and that would cover San Francisco, San Mateo County, and Santa Clara County. So let's dive right in. I will be pausing for questions every 2 or 3 after a particularly complex or interesting ballot measure. The statewide propositions, starting with Proposition 14. Proposition 14 renews bonds for stem cell research. Those of you with good memories will remember back in 2004, there was a bond measure that passed for stem cell research. It founded a new agency in California to do research involving embryonic stem cells. In the interim, they have spent all of their bond funding. They have built regenerative medicine institutes at University of California, at Stanford, at USC, and they have funded the construction of such labs at various private biotech companies as well. And because they have run out of the funding, they have come back to the voters asking for more money. This would be $5.5 billion. The $5.5 billion would be repaid from the general fund. Now, the general fund is where your state income taxes go, and it is where lots of other various state fees and so forth go. It's the state's primary budget, and it tends to hover somewhere in the $110 to $120 billion per year range. 40% of the general fund approximately is pledged to supporting schools. So that's what the general fund is. If Proposition 14 passes, the general fund will incur a commitment to pay about $250 million to retire these bonds for roughly the next 30 years. The money will fund continued research using stem cells for medical treatments. $1.5 billion of the $5.5 billion is reserved for research into neurological diseases of the brain, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and others. As I said earlier, the previous bond passed 16 years ago. So why might you vote in favor of Proposition 14? Arguments in favor. Prop 14 is needed to help fight serious diseases, including cancer, diabetes, and neurological disorders. The federal funding is unreliable, and what this refers to is back in 2004, the presidential administration at the time restricted funding of research into embryonic stem cells. Now, that restriction was lifted when the next administration came along in 2009, and the current administration has not placed those restrictions back on the research, but they've done things in that direction, and there are indications that it might be coming, depending on what happens in the fall election. And finally, you might vote in favor of Prop 14 if you want to use the money to create jobs, and the construction of these laboratories and the research there has created, it is claimed, on the order of 10,000 jobs. Reasons to vote against Proposition 14. It contains expenses that are not capital expenses, things like short-term expenses for administration, for laboratory equipment and chemicals, and people who believe that bond funding, a long-term loan over the course of 3 decades, should be used only for capital equipment that will last the duration of the loan, believe that Prop 14 makes inappropriate use of the bond proceeds. A second reason to vote against Prop 14 is that this research is traditionally funded by the federal government, and it's very unusual for the state to step in. And finally, we can't afford that $250 million a year in this time of uncertainty. It is by no means certain what the state budget will look like for the next year or 2 or 3. And so people who are opposed to Prop 14 believe this is the wrong time to be taking on an additional burden. So that's Prop 14. Prop 15, taxes on commercial property. This has to do with the original Proposition 13 of 1978. When Prop 13 passed, there was double-digit inflation in California and the entire country, and that caused property values and therefore property taxes to rise a great deal every year. What Prop 13 did was it rolled back the assessments and said for both residential and commercial/industrial property, your assessed value and therefore your property tax bill can increase only 2% per year, regardless of the market value of that property. So that as long as you or your commercial entity owns that property, your property taxes will go up a predictable maximum of 2% per year. Proposition 15 proposes a split roll. Under Proposition 15, residential property taxes will retain that cap of 2% increase per year, but commercial and industrial property will now be taxed at its current potential resale value. In other words, it will be reassessed at market rate. As I just said a second ago, residential real estate is unaffected by Prop 15. Prop 15 hopes to exclude small businesses by providing an exception to this reassessment if the business owns less than $3 million worth of commercial and industrial property. It also excludes the first $500,000 of business equipment. Now, you may not be aware, as I was not aware when I first started studying this, that business equipment is considered property and is taxed along with the real estate. Under Prop 15, if you own $500,000 or less worth of business equipment, your tax bill for that business equipment will be $0. So this bullet describes mechanisms to to exclude smaller businesses that own their land from the reassessment. The impact of Proposition 15 is that it will provide anywhere from $6.5 to $11.5 billion in new revenue, 40% of which will go to schools and community colleges, the rest of which will be distributed to local governments by the state. Why might you vote in favor of Prop 15? One reason, you might believe that Proposition 13 was not intended to benefit wealthy corporations, but rather was aimed at residential real estate. And this corrects an overreach on the part of Prop 13. You might vote in favor of Prop 15 if you believe that this money is needed for schools, fire departments, and other local services. And you might vote for 15 because you believe that only larger property owning companies should be subject to this, and small businesses and farms are protected under Prop 15. Reasons to vote against Prop 15. Raising taxes will increase the cost of everything. That the companies that that will have their taxes, property taxes increased by Prop 15 will pass those costs along. That many small businesses will be hurt despite the protections. The background to this argument is that most small businesses, rather than owning their property, they rent. And a typical part of a commercial property rental agreement is that the tenant pays the property tax. So in this case, a small business that rents will actually be subject to the large increase that's likely to happen in the property taxes for where they have their business. And finally, this refers to the disbursement of the money from Prop 15. It says here, basic aid school districts may not get any of the new revenue except for a token $100 per student. Oh, I'm seeing a couple of requests for me to speak up. I will get a little bit closer. Here we go. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the basic aid school districts and how the money will be distributed. There is a per student budget that the state has laid out. And those districts that are in areas where there is a high amount of property taxes collected exceed that state budget. And those districts are referred to as basic aid because rather than getting compensatory or aid to bring them up to the level, they're above that. Basic aid school districts under Prop 15, if their local property taxes exceed not just the current funding level, but also the raised funding level that will occur under Prop 15, they will get $100 per student only. And this, as I understand it, is likely to affect a lot of the school districts in our area. So let me pause right here and see if there are any important questions. And I'm not seeing. Good, well, let me invite you as we go along to type your questions into the Q&A window. And I'll pause after a particularly complex ballot proposition and take a couple of questions. I don't want you to have to wait a whole 45 minutes to ask a question on a given issue. All right, Proposition 16 has to do with affirmative action. This reverses a ballot proposition from 24 years ago, Prop 209, which outlawed affirmative action in the state. If Prop 16 passes, it will allow public agencies and universities to include factors such as race, sex, color, ethnicity, and color of country of origin as part of their decision making. Prop 16 will affect public hiring and contracting, and it will also affect admission to public colleges and universities. And I should point out that affirmative action, particularly in college admissions, is intended to be remedial, and it can only be used to distinguish among candidates who are equally qualified. There are no quotas or set-asides allowed under affirmative action, and these are limitations are the result of Supreme Court rulings over the years. You might vote in favor of Proposition 16 if you believe that we need to enable a necessary remedy for centuries of discrimination against women and people of color. If you believe that this is a concrete step that voters can take to support social justice. And if you believe that Prop 16 will not disadvantage Asian Americans in college admissions. There's a fair amount of controversy over whether this will be the case. And I will leave that at that. Reasons to vote against Proposition 16. The state should be race blind and treat everyone equally. Not every minority member is disadvantaged, so not every minority member needs affirmative action. The opponents of Prop 16 might believe that affirmative action should help only those who truly need it. And Prop 16 may lead to higher contract costs than the current lowest qualified bidder system that is used when public agencies let contracts. Proposition 17, parolee voting. Prop 17 will allow people who have been released from prison after their prison terms and are currently on parole under the supervision of a parole supervisor. It will allow them to vote. As it is today, parolees are not allowed to register or vote. This would affect approximately 60,000 parolees in California. People in prison will remain ineligible to vote. You might vote in favor of 17 if you believe that parole exists to retrain felons to be good citizens, and that voting is a key part of citizenship. So voting for parolees will help them adjust. You could vote for Prop 17 if you believe that recidivism, returning to prison, is lower in places that allow parolees to vote. And if you have seen that other states, such as Utah, Indiana, North Dakota, allow parolees to vote, yet California does not, and you want to bring California into line with those other states. You might vote against 17 if you believe that felons should complete the whole sentence, including the prison term and parole, before being allowed to vote. If you believe that voting should be reserved until after parolees have proved that they've changed by successfully completing the parole period, or if you believe that crime victims deserve justice and that allowing the convicts to vote during parole is not justice. And Proposition 18 will allow 17-year-olds who are not quite 18 yet to vote in primary elections. This year, our primary election was held in March, and the general election is being held 8 months later. There is a collection of people who were 17 back in March and will be 18 in November. The question under Prop 18 here is, should those people be allowed to select the finalists and nominate the presidential candidates in March if they're going to be voting on them in November? This would make somewhere between 250 to 400,000 people eligible, depending on whether the primary is in June, which is just 5 months before the election, or March, 8 months. Realistically, though, this might add 65,000 votes to a primary. And this is because only half, roughly, of the people who are eligible to vote register, and only a portion of those vote in a primary election. So ultimately, this will add up to roughly a 1% increase in the amount of voters. You might vote in favor of 18 if you believe that anyone who can vote in a general election should vote in the nominating contest for that election. And that allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primary elections will increase voter interest and participation. You could vote against 18 if you feel that 17-year-olds are not legally adults and won't take elections seriously, and that their high school teachers and counselors will be able to influence how these students vote. Good, and I do see a question here asking whether I will address who supports and opposes the various ballot measures. That is something that I would ask you to visit the online resources to find. In particular, Voters Edge shows who's providing the main funding for all of these things. I'm here to describe the issues, and it's been said many times that once these ballot propositions pass, they are no longer the property of the sponsors. And so really it's up to the voters to understand the impact apart from who's pushing them. Proposition 19 has to do with property taxes for older home buyers. Under Prop 19, it will allow certain homeowners to transfer their property tax base to a replacement residence. Now, what does that mean? That means, going back to Prop 13 from 1978, your home has both a market value and an assessed value. The assessed value was set when you purchased it and has been ratcheting up very slowly at 2% a year. The market rate might be double or triple or higher the assessed rate. When you sell your house and purchase a new one, under ordinary circumstances, your property tax is now based on the purchase price of your new home. Under Proposition 19, you'd be able to transfer your property tax base, in other words, the assessed value, to your replacement residence of any value. Under current law, this applies to homeowners who are 55 or older, who are disabled, or who are the victims of a natural disaster or contamination. Under Prop 19, they can go any place in the state. Under current law, they have to do it within the county or within a collection of 10 counties that have reciprocal agreements with each other. Under current law, you can do it only once. Under Prop 19, up to 3 times. And the probably the key provision of Prop 19, under current law, you can take this property tax base to a new home of equal or lesser value. In other words, you can do it only when you are, so to speak, downsizing. Under Prop 19, you'd be able to take that property tax base, transfer it to a residence of any value. The amount of the new residence that matches the amount of your old residence will be taxed at the same rate you were paying on the old residence, and the difference will be reassessed. So you'll pay the same amount of tax on that you're paying on your current place, plus any increased value. And I hope that's clear. If it isn't, please refer to the ballot pamphlet or Voters Edge or Easy Voter Guide. They can explain it a bit more clearly. Now, Prop 19 will result in a net decrease in property tax revenue over the years for local governments. To compensate, Prop 19 increases reassessments for inherited homes and farms. There will be a $1 million exemption, and any homes or farms that are valued at more than $1 million, the amount above $1 million will be reassessed at the time of inheritance. In addition, to claim the $1 million exemption, the person who inherited the home must live in it. Under current law, inherited second homes and businesses are not reassessed upon inheritance. Under Proposition 19, they will be. Arguments in favor of 19. Fire victims should not be penalized further by paying higher property taxes on their replacement homes, should they be of higher value than the home that they're replacing. Empty nesters will downsize, allowing younger families to move in. And actually, I might change this to say that empty nesters will move at all to either higher or lower valued properties anywhere in the state. And you might be in favor of 19 if you want to close the loopholes for inheritors of mansions. This refers to the phenomenon that you see occasionally of someone who inherits a mansion with very low property taxes, rents it out for a very high monthly rental, but lives someplace else. It becomes, in essence, a business with a property tax exemption. You might vote against 19 if you believe that it will take away two protections that families have relating to inheritance, and that it may force some to sell property that has been in their family for generations. You may vote against 19 if you believe that it amounts to $1 billion tax increase and you're against tax increases in general. And you might vote against 19 if you see this as an attempt by the real estate industry to increase property sales. The people who believe this argument against 19 point out that the real estate industry does collect commissions on sales of property. They do not collect commissions on inheritance. So that's Prop 19. Let's move on to Prop 20. Prop 20 will make it harder for felons to qualify for parole after serving the term for their primary offense. It will do this by imposing new restrictions on the parole process. It will also reclassify as violent for the purposes of parole such crimes as robbery, extortion, and elder abuse. Those are currently not considered violent for the purposes of determining parole. Prop 20 will also create a new felony of serial theft or serial shoplifting, which is one of these misdemeanors repeated 3 or more times. And also under Prop 20, DNA can be collected from certain misdemeanor convicts. Right now, you have to be convicted of a felony to have DNA collected. Arguments in favor of 20. It will prevent violent criminals from getting out of prison too early. Habitual petty criminals should be treated as felons. And DNA from convicted drug possessors and shoplifters, which are 2 of the misdemeanors that would be included, will help solve more serious crimes. Arguments against 20. It will keep more people in prison longer when we should be reducing prison terms, not extending them. It overturns voter decisions from recent elections. I should point out here that portions of Prop 20 essentially roll back provisions that were in a pair of propositions from 2016 and I believe 2012. The most recent of those would have been Proposition 57. And Proposition 20 wastes millions of dollars on prisons that should be spent on healthcare, education, and housing. This refers to the fact that Prop 20 will have the net effect of increasing prison populations above what they would be should Prop 20 fail. Proposition 21. This requires a little bit of background. Currently, there are about 15 or 20 cities and 1 county in California that have local rent control. And those local rent control ordinances are subject to limitations under what's known as the Costa-Hawkins Act of 1995. And those said that local rent control can apply to buildings that were built in 1995 and earlier, or in certain places, even before that. In Los Angeles City, I believe it's 1978, and in San Francisco, it's sometime in the 1980s. Now, one important thing to note is that last year, the legislature passed and the governor signed statewide rent control. Now, under statewide rent control applies, limitations on rent increases apply to any rental property that's 15 years old. So you can see there's a 10-year gap here. Under Costa-Hawkins, the building has to be 25 years old, 1995 or earlier. So Prop 21 would bring Costa-Hawkins into line with the new state law. It permits cities and counties to apply rent controls to housing 15 years old, and the 15 years old will march ahead with time. It will always be 15 years in the past. So 5 years from now, the base date could be or the construction date could be as late as 2010. Prop 21 will permit controls on single-family homes and condominiums. Currently under Costa-Hawkins, these are not allowed, but they are part of the statewide law. And the statewide law, I should point out, applies everywhere in the state except in those localities that do have local rent control. Local rent control does exist in Mountain View. It does not exist in Los Altos or Los Altos Hills. Prop 21 will permit limits on increases between tenant. This is known as vacancy control, and vacancy control is not allowed under Costa-Hawkins, but it will be allowed under Prop 21. Now, landlords are allowed to bump rent 15% for 3 years on units that are vacant, and this is in order to allow them to do renovations on the unit, painting, new carpet, appliances, that sort of thing. Now, this only applies to landlords with more than 2 units. So small landlords or someone that rents out a room in a house will not be affected by Prop 21. And overall, and this applies to both the old law and the new law, ordinances must allow a fair rate of return for landlords. So at any point, and this is something that exists today, a landlord can challenge rent control if they believe they are not being provided a fair rate of return. You might vote for Prop 21 if you believe that rent control helps families, seniors, and veterans stay in their homes. That Prop 21 guarantees that landlords can make a profit, and that the 15-year limit, instead of the hard 1995 or earlier, still gives developers enough time to collect market rate rents that constitutes a reward for building much needed housing. So in other words, people who support Prop 21 believe that the 15-year limit is sufficient incentive for developers to build new apartments and other new rental housing, because they will be able to collect market rate rent for at least the first 15 years. If you're against Prop 21, you believe that rent control discourages developers from building desperately needed housing. You believe that rent control laws delay apartment repairs and cause other unwanted behaviors by landlords, and that rent control can reduce home values up to 20%. This refers to Prop 21's provision that it will apply to single-family homes and condominiums. Under Costa-Hawkins, rent control cannot apply to single-family homes and condominiums. So if there are any rental single-family homes in your neighborhood, they will come under, they're currently renting for market rate. If Prop 21 passes, they could come under rent controls. And once again, Prop 21 does not force any local city council or board of supervisors to apply these new aspects of rent control. Instead, it simply empowers the local governing body to act within these relaxed limitations. So at this point, let me take a quick look at the Q&A and see if there's anything particularly interesting, and I'm not seeing any. Good. Off we go to Proposition 22. This is the proposition that has broken the record for the amount of money raised in support and opposition. Under a new law that went into effect on January 1st of this year, people who drive for Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and other transit-oriented online companies are now classified as employees rather than independent contractors. Under Prop 22, these drivers would be classified once again as independent contractors, not employees. And the main difference is that employees are entitled to receive minimum wage for all hours worked and overtime if it is more over a certain amount per week. They're entitled to sick time, unemployment insurance, health insurance, and workers' compensation. Under current law, they are entitled to all of these. And that current law is referred to frequently as AB 5. If Prop 22 passes, they will not be entitled to these. Instead, Prop 22 will offer certain other benefits. It will offer 120% or 1 1/5 of minimum wage, and that minimum wage will be applied to the hours only during which they are driving passengers or doing a DoorDash delivery. So time waiting for the next gig will not be counted under this 120%. And a recent study indicated that on average, and there's a tremendous amount of variation, but on average, these drivers spend roughly 1/3 of their time waiting. So you can do the math on that. Prop 22 guarantees a health stipend for those that work a minimum of 25 hours per week. They would get 82% of the premium for what the California ACA Covered California advertises as the bronze plan, which is the lowest level. So for that, a driver would have to work for 25 hours a week, which is to say 25 hours of engaged time driving passengers or cargo. If they fall below 25 hours a week for a quarter, they would get half of this. And if they fall below, I believe it's 15 hours a week, they would get none. Prop 22 also guarantees a maximum 12-hour workday for these drivers. And Prop 22 prohibits local regulation of these services. You might vote in favor of Prop 22 because you want drivers to have flexible schedules and you believe that they must be independent contractors rather than employees in order to get those flexible schedules. You might vote for Prop 22 if you feel that the business model for Uber and Lyft, DoorDash, and these other companies requires use of independent contractors rather than employees. And that if Prop 22 were to fail, hundreds of thousands of good jobs, whether they're full-time or side gigs, would be lost. You might vote against Prop 22 if you feel that employees can have flexible schedules as well as independent contractors, that these companies can afford to pay employee benefits to drivers. And in fact, the business model does not require the drivers to be independent contractors. And you might vote against 22 if you feel that the drivers deserve sick leave, unemployment, overtime, and the other benefits that are not replaced under Prop 22. Prop 23, this is real issue whiplash here. There are a lot of variety in these late propositions. Prop 23 requires kidney dialysis clinics to have a doctor present whenever patients are receiving treatment. This is currently not a requirement of these kidney dialysis clinics, and there are two main kidney dialysis clinic companies in California. One is called DaVita, one is called Fresenius, so this measure would largely affect those two. Under Prop 23, the clinics would need permission from the state before closing a location or reducing services at a location. And under Prop 23, clinics could not discriminate against clients based on their insurance. Now, this refers to something that was observed at clinics of both of the main chains, where they were encouraging or persuading, or some would say pressuring, their patients who were on Medicare to drop Medicare and instead enroll in a private insurance plan. And the premiums for that insurance plan were heavily subsidized by the Kidney Foundation. Kidney Foundation receives the bulk of its funding from Fresenius and DaVita. Under those conditions, Fresenius and DaVita receive reimbursement from private insurance that is 4 times the size of the reimbursement that they received from Medicare. Under Prop 23, that kind of behavior would be outlawed. And by the way, there are lawsuits pending on the scheme, I hesitate to say scam, that I just described. You might vote in favor of Prop 23 if you believe that dialysis is a dangerous procedure and there ought to be a doctor on site just in case some problem occurs. That rural communities need the protection from closure that Prop 23 will provide, and that clinics should not be pushing Medicare patients into private insurance in order to collect higher reimbursements. You might vote against 23 if you believe that doctors are unnecessary and are in fact needed elsewhere, and that Prop 23 will reduce the quality of care where those doctors are truly needed. That the increased cost of this measure would naturally force some clinics to close, making it harder for patients to get the life-saving treatment, in particular in areas that don't have many of these clinics. Patients might be forced to drive long distances multiple times a week to get this treatment. And finally, opponents of Prop 23 point out that there was a similar measure on the ballot 2 years ago, and voters rejected that, so they should reject Prop 23 as well. Oh, and finally, I should point out with Prop 23 that this issue of clinics pushing Medicare patients to private insurance, the legislature actually has also passed a bill that would do exactly this. So this part of Prop 23, it's fairly late breaking news. I apologize, I should put it in the slide deck. But this part of Prop 23 won't actually do much over and above the existing new law. So what that means is that Prop 23, in essence, is about dialysis clinics having a doctor present, and the second bullet needing permission from the state before closing or reducing services. Sorry about that. Next time I give this talk, I will have that update at my fingertips. 2 left. Prop 24 has to do with consumer privacy rules. Now, there is a new consumer privacy law that went into effect at the beginning of this year and was enforced with fines starting just a few months ago in June. Prop 24 is very similar to the existing law. The difference is, I'm going to jump to the fourth bullet here, the law at the bottom of the page. The current law was passed by the legislature and it can be amended by the legislature. Under Prop 24, these consumer privacy rules can be amended only to increase protections. And as we'll see, advocates for Prop 24 believe that the law is vulnerable to lobbying from the industry. So people who favor 24, I'm jumping ahead here a little, believe that we need the law in order to prevent the legislature from decreasing consumer protections. So back up to the top here, Prop 24 will increase consumers' control of personal data. It has a few differences with current law. It will prevent companies from sharing sensitive personal information. Currently, they are prohibited from selling that data. Under Prop 24, they'll also be prohibited from sharing it. And this is sensitive information such as your location, your health data, any communications you have. Under Prop 24, if you ask a company to correct your personal data, it must happen as requested. Under Prop 24, there will be a new state agency to oversee privacy laws. Under the current law, this is left to the state attorney general. The state attorney general was quoted earlier this year as saying that this is a low priority with his office. And so only a handful of these are being prosecuted. And then the third big bullet, Prop 24, will create new fines for data breaches. Under the current law, companies have 30 days to correct whatever condition led to the data breach. And if the data breach is fixed within 30 days, they do not have to pay the fine. Under Prop 24, they will no longer be allowed to duck those fines. Prop 24 also will increase by a factor of 3 fines for misuse of data if the person involved is a minor. You might vote for Prop 24 if you feel we need to prevent companies from tracking everything we do online. If we believe we need to protect children by giving the state more power to go after violators. And if you believe that the state ought to have a new agency, an enforcement arm, to defend privacy rights. You might vote against Prop 24 if you feel that the new data privacy law that just went into effect needs some time before we modify it. We should see what works and what doesn't work and then amend it. You might vote against Prop 24, on the other hand, if you believe that it still gives too much power to the technology companies and doesn't go far enough. And you might believe that consumers shouldn't have to demand data protection, that it should be automatic. And this is the difference between opt-out and opt-in. Under Prop 24, it's up to the consumer to find and click the opt-out button for sharing and selling of data, and collecting and keeping of data. People who believe this last argument here believe that it should be an opt-in system, that no online company should be collecting and storing personal information unless they are explicitly given permission in an opt-in. And last on the ballot, Prop 25, which would eliminate cash bail. This will eliminate the payment of bail, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, bail is essentially a collateral, something that you give to the court in order to obtain release from jail while you're awaiting trial. Under Prop 25, all arrestees would be released free after being arrested until their arraignment, unless a court determines that they are at risk of either committing a new crime or missing a court date. Those people who have been arrested could be kept in jail until the arraignment. Now, part of this evaluation of whether the person is at risk of doing these things is an artificial intelligence program that evaluates people who've been arrested based on personal data such as age and also demographic history of people arrested for similar crimes. Finally, under Prop 25, if the crime that the person is accused of is serious enough, a tracking device or check-in with a probation officer can be required between arrest and arraignment and trial. You might vote in favor of Prop 25 if you believe that bail as a concept is inherently unfair. People who have the resources, the wealthy, can walk out of jail after being arrested, while the poor, who are unable to raise bail, must stay in jail until their arraignment. Prop 25 offers decisions based on public safety, not on money. And finally, Prop 25 would eliminate bail, and bail forces certain guilty pleas to crimes people didn't commit. It's possible for someone to be arrested for one crime, not be able to raise bail, be stuck in jail, and simply in order to get out of jail, decide to plead guilty to a lesser crime. That will spring the person from jail in most cases. But if you believe that's an injustice, you might vote in favor of Prop 25. You might vote against Prop 25 if you believe that zero bail lets dangerous criminals onto the street. If you believe that evaluating everybody who's been arrested will mean much more work for already overburdened courts. And you might vote against 25 if you believe that the artificial intelligence algorithm is biased against minorities, since it has been trained, the algorithm has been trained on data from a system that has been shown to be discriminatory. We've got 3 local measures, and I will go through these right now. In Mountain View, Proposition C will prohibit parking of oversized vehicles, which is any vehicle over 22 feet long or 7 feet wide or 7 feet tall, on streets 40 feet or narrower, with exceptions for vans for the disabled and certain short-term activities such as deliveries and construction. Now, in Mountain View, almost all residential streets are narrower than 40 feet. Also in Mountain View, an earlier ordinance prohibits parking of these oversized vehicles on any streets that have bicycle lanes. So for example, Shoreline Boulevard near El Camino Real, between El Camino and the train tracks, is 100 feet wide, but it has bicycle lanes on it. And so these large vehicles are not allowed to park there. Under Prop C, signs will indicate which streets are affected. And there will be penalties for the owners of the vehicles that leave them on streets narrower than 40 feet. It will be a parking ticket, and they will also be subject to towing. You might vote in favor of C if you believe that large vehicles on narrow streets pose a safety risk for bicyclists and others. That additional street sweeping, garbage pickup, sanitation services, and so forth are an undue cost on the city and therefore on taxpayers. That safe parking lots, which is a county program, have capacity for RV dwellers, and the RVs should park in these lots instead of on the street. And that more than half of RV dwellers have no previous Mountain View addresses. So in other words, these are people who are not already Mountain View residents, and they're moving to our city in order to take advantage. You might vote against Prop C if you believe that it prohibits RV parking nearly citywide, since streets with bike lanes are off limits and all other streets tend to be narrower than 40 feet. You might vote against C if you believe that RV leakage and waste are already addressed by existing city ordinances. If you believe that the Safe Parking Lots program is inadequate and offers only 60 of the 200 needed spaces, and that families in RVs are essential workers in our community and we need them to live nearby. Proposition S covers the Santa Clara Valley Water District. It's the continuation of an existing parcel tax. The current parcel tax of 0.6 of a cent per square foot currently runs through 2028. Under Prop S, Measure S, there will be no end date, and instead it will be up to the voters to repeal it at some date in the future. This will raise $45.5 million per year for the water district, and there's an exemption for seniors. The kinds of projects that will be funded and are currently being funded by Measure S concern safe drinking water, flood protection, habitat restoration, and seismic improvements to the local dams. You might vote in favor of S if you feel that it does not increase taxes, but simply renews what the voters approved 8 years ago. That the safety of our water supply depends on the district having this funding, and that there is an independent citizen oversight commission that will ensure that the money is spent responsibly. You might vote against S if you believe that special purpose taxes must be reviewed regularly by voters and that Prop S will make this parcel tax permanent. And the voters will not get to have a say on it every few years the way they do today. You might vote against S if you note that many parcels are owned by non-residents who live outside of the water district and won't have a chance to vote on a tax that affects their property. And you might vote against X if you believe that the Independent Citizen Oversight Commission can have its findings ignored by the district board, that the Citizen Oversight Commission, in essence, doesn't have any real power. And finally, Measure RR, the railroad sales tax. This covers Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Francisco, and it has to be approved by 2/3 of the voters across those 3 counties. It is a 1/8 cent increase in the sales tax in all 3 of those counties, and it will provide $100 million per year for Caltrain. Much of that will go for day-to-day operations. Much of it will also go for capital improvements such as electrification and the new rolling stock that will be needed to make use of that, signal upgrades and station upgrades. Caltrain is currently funded by voluntary contributions of roughly $30 million a year from each of the 3 counties. And it's an open question whether the counties would continue to contribute that or use that $30 million for other purposes. You might vote in favor of RR if you believe we need it to keep Caltrain running for thousands of essential workers that are using it. If you want to fund system improvements like electrification, which provide faster and more frequent trains and also reduce noise and the air pollution caused by the current diesel engines. And if you want to help more people ride Caltrain, which will have the effect of preventing traffic congestion by removing cars from the highways. You might vote against RR if you think that Caltrain ridership may not recover following COVID-19, that many people will continue to be working from home and not commuting. If you believe that, then the capital improvements funded by RR could be an unused boondoggle like the high-speed rail system currently under construction in the Central Valley. You might vote against RR if you believe that sales taxes are regressive and hit poor people harder. And you might vote against RR if you believe that existing taxes can fund Caltrain at its current level, and we don't need a higher sales tax. So that's the end of my review of the ballot measures. It appears I've gone about a quarter hour over. Let me ask my co-host, Lisa, do we have time for questions, or should I ask people to attend our Q&A sessions?
You should have some time. I think we gave it till 4:30.
Okay, marvelous. So we've got about 14 minutes for questions. Do you want to open the microphones, or should we ask people to type them into the Q&A?
I think we decided on typing.
Okay, great. So if you've got questions, type away. Let me go down the list here. Got a question from Michael Murphy. What effect will Prop 22 have on other industries, such as musicians, actors, for-profit symphonies, theaters that employ those? So Prop 22 was about Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash drivers. Proposition 22 will have no impact on anybody who is not a driver for one of these people or goods transit applications. Those musicians, actors, symphonies, theaters, there is a brand new law, an adjustment to AB 5 that was just signed in September, a couple of weeks ago, really, that excludes freelance actors, musicians, photographers, journalists, and a few other categories from AB 5. So those people are already allowed to be independent contractors, and Prop 22 will not have any impact on that. Next, didn't we already have a dialysis proposition in the previous election? We did indeed. It was somewhat different. It had to do with, well, I won't go into it, but it was somewhat different, and it did not pass. And so the same organizations who sponsored that one are back with a new one. Please explain the opt-in and opt-out impact of Prop 24. My description was not very clear. Okay, I will try one more time. Under opt-out, the company may collect, store, and otherwise share your information unless you specifically tell them not to. And when you visit a website today, you will very frequently see a bar at the bottom of the page that says, we want you to be aware of your rights. Click on this link here and we'll tell you what they are and give you a chance to opt out. And if you do somehow navigate through and find the opt-out button, you can click it and that company will not be allowed to store your information for any longer than it needs to do the transaction or to do what it needs to do for your relationship with that website. Under opt-in, the posture of the website is we are not allowed to collect and store any of your information unless you tell us that you want us to do that. So you are opting in to allow the website to collect and store and potentially share and sell your information. So that's the difference between opt-out and opt-in. We currently have an opt-out system, and certain court decisions mean that having an opt-in law is an iffy proposition, so to speak. In all likelihood, an opt-in would be declared an unconstitutional limitation on free speech. Next, has the governor signed the dialysis law? I believe so, but don't quote me on that. I would have to look it up. All right, what is the argument with affirmative action regarding the Asian students? This is a deeply fraught issue. I can recommend a couple of resources. Hang on, let me look this up. At Columbia University, there is a professor name of Jennifer Lee in the sociology department. And she has published a recent report based on a long-term study of various ethnicities under Proposition 209, which banned affirmative action. Her conclusion is that reversing Prop 209 will actually help and not harm Asian Americans in employment, promotions, and earnings while having no effect on college admissions. There are people that disagree with that and believe that should we allow affirmative action, that it will have the net result of reducing Asian American representation at the University of California and Cal State University because extra consideration will be given to equally qualified members of other minorities. So that's the argument. Those are the arguments regarding Asian Americans. All right. And I think that is it. Are there other questions? Perhaps not. So let me mention that League will be having additional Q&A sessions. We've got, I believe, one more of these pros and cons that I will be giving. And I can tell you what those are. I'm gonna grab my calendar here. So we've got the pros and cons today on the 4th. There's an additional pros and cons on Tuesday the 13th, where I will be delivering essentially the same material. That's at 7 p.m. And then we will be having 3 question and answer sessions for people who have viewed these live or viewed the recordings. And those will be on Sunday the 18th at 3 p.m., same time as this. Wednesday the 21st at 7 p.m. And finally on Sunday the 25th of October at 3 p.m. And those will be interactive. And I will be here, and it's possible I will have some other experts with me to go over your questions about these ballot propositions. So please write down any questions that come up while you are going over your ballot materials. Once again, I urge you to use those online helper sites, the Voter's Edge and the Easy Voter Guide. And all of these are listed at our organization's website, League of Women Voters of Los Altos, Mountain View, LWVLAMV.org. And in addition to recording of this session, we also have recordings of the forums for the candidates for the many, many offices that you saw earlier. So I think we can probably end it here. I want to thank you all for your kind attention. I hope I was able to clear up more confusion than I caused, and come back with questions when we have the Q&A sessions.